I've just played every Far Cry game ever made, going back over 20 years, diving into one of the most chaotic and explosive action franchises ever to exist, starting with the very first Far Cry released in 2004, a game that created a foundation for open-world shooters and set the stage for many weird, wonderful, and often insane moments. The game dropped us into the middle of a tropical island where we were tasked with taking down enemies in what felt like a freeform open-world setting. This was a time when games like these were still a novelty. Far Cry 1, a game known for its primitive AI and technology, was something groundbreaking. It wasn't just about mindless shooting, there was strategy. You could approach things your way, from sneaking through the jungle to blowing everything up in sight. But let's not sugarcoat this. Far Cry 1 had its flaws. First of all, the controls were pretty wonky even for the time. You had to get used to moving your character in a way that felt like controlling a robot through a swamp. The AI was no better. Sometimes they were as dumb as a bag of rocks, but other times they could take you out with pinpoint accuracy from what felt like a mile away. The game had some of the most intense stealth moments, but it also felt like you were constantly fighting against the game itself just to move smoothly. But hey, what can you expect from a game made in 2004? It had its charm, even if the graphics were a bit rough around the edges. The level design was still ambitious, with sprawling maps and lots of different ways to approach each mission. And of course, we had the iconic jungle setting, which later became a signature for the series. The story, though, don't even get me started. There was some backstory about genetic experiments and mercenaries, but the real fun came from just messing around with the environment. This was a real sandbox game in a time when that was still a new concept. 2 years later, in 2006, Far Cry Instinct's Evolution hit consoles. But we're gonna skip that for a second because we're focused on the mainline releases. Let's jump to Far Cry 2, which released in 2008. Now, this was a major shift. The tropical islands were gone, replaced by a war-torn African landscape. It was a world full of corruption, conflict, and danger. It was far more grounded, but the biggest change was the introduction of a more realistic approach to health and ammo. The game had a very grueling atmosphere, and it wasn't for the faint-hearted. The controls felt tighter, and there was a whole system of disease and infection to keep you on your toes. You had to manage your health, watch out for malaria, and constantly worry about running out of ammunition. But let me tell you, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. This game was brutal. The respawning enemy camps felt like they were out to get you. Every mission felt like an uphill battle, and that could get repetitive pretty quickly. But in true Far Cry fashion, the chaos and explosions made every moment feel epic. Far Cry 2 also introduced the dynamic open-world elements that made later games in the series so much fun. There were vehicles to use, guns to customize, and a huge world to explore. But the grind. The constant battle with malaria pills, the constant search for supplies, the fact that you could get caught in ambushes out of nowhere. It wore thin after a while. Still, this game set the stage for what was to come. It was a tough, unforgiving world, and completing missions felt satisfying, even though you'd probably need a few hours to recover after each one. 2012, Far Cry 3 dropped, and this is where everything changed for the series. The open world formula was perfected, and we were introduced to Vaas, one of the most insane, unpredictable villains in gaming history. Vaas's manic personality, his unpredictable behavior, and his ability to twist everything you knew about morality made Far Cry 3 an unforgettable experience. And this time, you weren't just fighting mercenaries or mutants. You were stuck on a dangerous island full of pirates, mercenaries, and psychopaths. It was gritty, it was raw, and it was one of the best open world games of its time. The game's biggest strength was its character development and story. You played as Jason Brody, an adrenaline junkie who gets stranded on this island with his friends and has to survive. What started off as a simple escape the island mission became a descent into madness. Vaas was an unforgettable character, a villain that you loved to hate. His monologue about the definition of insanity became legendary, and it was clear that Far Cry 3 had a story that was compelling, not just in terms of gameplay, but narrative too. This was also the first game in the series to introduce a skill tree and upgrade system, allowing you to grow stronger as you progress through the game. The combat felt more refined, and the addition of the open world, the hunting system, and base liberation missions made the game feel alive. The world was full of wildlife, and you could literally hunt animals to craft better equipment. The best part? The chaos. You could plan your attacks, or you could just start a firefight and watch the world burn around you. Next up, we have Far Cry 4, released in 2014. This game had a lot of the same elements as Far Cry 3, but with a new setting in the Himalayan region of Kirat. The story revolved around Pagan Min, another memorable villain. He was charismatic, funny, and absolutely ruthless. The world was bigger, the mechanics were tighter, and the whole game just felt like an expanded version of Far Cry 3. It had the same open world exploration, the same sense of freedom, and the same ridiculous chaos that made Far Cry 3 so fun. Far Cry 4 introduced some new features, like the ability to ride elephants and hang glide through the air. The grappling hook became a fan favorite addition, and the game had a much more vibrant, diverse landscape to explore. The addition of co-op play was another highlight, allowing you to team up with a friend and cause havoc together. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was a more polished and refined version of what we had seen in Far Cry 3. Now, let's jump to Far Cry 5 in 2018. This game took the series to America, where you fought a doomsday cult in the fictional Hope County, Montana. The cult leader, Joseph Seed, was the new face of evil in the franchise. This game was a departure from the tropical islands and jungles, setting its sights on a more political, real-world scenario. You weren't just fighting mercenaries anymore. You were taking down a group of people with a twisted ideology, and the stakes felt higher. The open world was massive, with more freedom than ever. You could choose your missions, your allies, and how you wanted to approach the game. The side missions were varied, and the world felt alive. But like Far Cry 2, there were times when the gameplay loop felt repetitive. The game also introduced a more prominent role for your character as a deputy sheriff, which gave a little more grounding to the story. It had some great moments and was full of over-the-top action, but it didn't quite capture the magic that Far Cry 3 had. Then, we had Far Cry New Dawn in 2019. This was a spin-off, set in the same world as Far Cry 5, but years after the events of the previous game. It was a post-apocalyptic world, and you fought against the twins who had taken control of the region. The game had a much more colorful, vibrant look compared to other entries, with a more RPG-like structure. It was fun, but it felt more like a rehash of Far Cry 5 with a few tweaks. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't groundbreaking either. Finally, we come to Far Cry 6 in 2021. This entry took us to the fictional Caribbean island of Yara, led by the dictator Anton Castillo, played by Giancarlo Esposito. The game introduced a new protagonist, Danny Rojas, who was looking to overthrow Castillo's regime. The game continued the series' trend of massive open worlds and over-the-top action, with a focus on guerrilla warfare. The game was visually stunning, and the open-world combat was as chaotic as ever. But again, it felt like the series was starting to lose its spark. The story was solid, the gameplay was fun, but it didn't quite feel as fresh as the earlier games in the series. So, after playing every Far Cry game ever made, it's clear that this series has always been about one thing: chaotic fun. From the tropical islands of Far Cry 1 to the jungles of Far Cry 6, this franchise has taken us through some insane environments, introduced us to some crazy characters, and let us wreak havoc in ways few games ever have. It's been a wild ride, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no matter where you go, there's always going to be chaos, explosions, and, of course, the unforgettable feeling of riding an elephant into battle.